And we begin tonight with the power of eight. 8 Republicans, that is. The band of 8 who rejected Kevin McCarthy, going against hundreds of their fellow Republicans, all of whom voted to keep the speaker in place, which means 8 people can take over an entire institution, pulling the plug on the House doing its job. There's been a lot of chaos this week, hand-wringing and infighting. And it's a scene that we should be really worried about. Daniel Ziblatt, co-author of the new book, Tyranny of the Minority, told the Washington Post, quote, "If you want to know what it looks like when democracy is in trouble, this is what it looks like. It should set off alarm bells that something is not right." Ziblatt is a professor of government at Harvard, so he knows a thing or two about what this work entails. Emphasis on the word work. This is work. They don't call it public service for nothing. But voters keep electing people who cannot do the job, which is weird, right? Because these are the people elected to make crucial decisions about health care, your child's education, food safety, roads, bridges, and jobs. It's nose to the grindstone work. Not everyone is built for it. Many people have hired or chosen people to do far less. Think about it. Would you trust this person to run a small business in your neighborhood?
Criminals are going to be criminals. If somebody wants to take you out and doesn't mind losing their life, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do about it.
Would you trust this person to watch your kids?
He's the one who is robbing hardworking Americans to pay for Karen's daughter's degree in lesbian dance theory.
Would you even talk to this person about the weather?
With due respect, sir, the farmers in my district recognize climate change as summer, winter, spring, and fall.
What about letting these people make rules and set the budget for you and your family?
Now we have Nancy Pelosi's gazpacho police spying on members of Congress.
Be honest, you wouldn't hire any of these people to work for your business. Do anything for your family, in your house, rummaging through your paperwork or anywhere near your kids. Because that would be a horrible idea, unproductive, risky, even dangerous. So why are so many American voters hiring this quality of person to manage the $6 trillion budget of the largest economy in the world? Why is one of the richest, most complex, and highly advanced market economies on earth in the hands of painfully underqualified, unserious people? All spending must emerge from the U.S. House of Representatives, per the Constitution, which is why the House is the one with the power to shut down the government by not agreeing to a budget. No one else in the government can do this job. But the Republican Party has a hiring problem because the folks who work for them do not understand that this is a job. To them, this is just fun. It's a television show. It's entertainment. It's being famous. But it's actually none of that. It's funding the Pentagon. It's managing the finances of the elderly and making sure that they can pick up their medicine. It's ensuring public school kids get their breakfast and lunch at school. So to put this job in the hands of what is essentially a clown car of chaos agents feels like an American suicide. Even worse, a suicide that you get to watch on TV. Because that is what really matters to these people: lights, camera, spectacle. Which may explain why Donald Trump is considering a visit to the U.S. Capitol early next week, as House Republicans consider who should be their next speaker. Trump is ineligible for the post under the party's own rules, barring anyone under indictment. But that hasn't sunk in with the party, which could also just change the rules. Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted today, quote, "If Trump becomes Speaker of the House chamber will be like a Trump rally every day. It would be the House of MAGA. AKA America would descend into a pit of chaos so deep it would take a century to repair." While revealing that it really is just a party for them, just a party, a circus, a rally. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer replied to Taylor Greene, quote, "No thanks, we're good. We've seen a Trump rally at the Capitol already. Touché. And that rally that we saw on January 6, 2021 wasn't just entertainment for the bored, angry, and unserious American far right. It was an attempted coup." Joining me now is Tom Nichols, staff writer for The Atlantic, and Daniel Ziblatt, the professor I mentioned a moment ago. He is the co-author of the new book, Tyranny of the Minority. Thank you for being here, both of you. I do want to go to you first, Professor Ziblatt, because it strikes me that the era we're in is both frightening and actually sort of comically unserious. You know, I spoke with a gentleman yesterday on the show who used to work for Paul Ryan and John Boehner. I wasn't a fan of either of them, but they didn't come across as completely unserious human beings. This new batch of MAGA Republicans are both power mad. They want to run the country, but they want to run the country for no purpose. They just want to be in the front and be on TV. And I can't see anything else they want other than for, I don't know, to zero out programs for the poor. What are we facing, and how am I talk me down if I'm too freaked out?
Well, one way of interpreting what's going on is that it's a really close balance in the Congress between Republicans and Democrats. But we have to remember that Nancy Pelosi, with even a narrower majority, was able to hold her coalition together. And so the only way to explain what's happening now with the Republican Party is its extreme radicalization. You know, so the left and the Democratic Party knows how to play ball, knows how to get politics done. The extreme right of the Republican Party doesn't. And so what we're really seeing is the consequences of the radicalization of the Republican Party. And that, yes, sorry, Joy, but it should frighten us. And so that's where I'm going to kind of end my answer to you.
And, you know, and Tom, you wrote a really great article recently. And I mean, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Less humor in it than you do, I guess. That's what I would have to say.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. I mean, Tom, your recent piece pointed out, I mean, part of it, I think, is that people don't really know what the government does, right? So at a certain point, folks are just sort of entertaining themselves to death. They don't know what the government does. So they're like, this person's more entertaining than that one. So I think Trump is funny. I'd rather have him than boring Joe Biden. Biden's old. Trump is hilarious to me. And so it's like not really understanding what the job is. But in the sense of the Congress, I mean, this is a $6 trillion economy. These people are in charge of divvying out the money. And they don't come in with any set of ideas that they're pushing, that even if I disagree with them, at least they'd be ideas. They're like, defunding Ukraine is our line we're going to draw in the sand. That's like 0.1% of the budget. That's not causing our debt. And I don't think ordinary people know that. So they think, well, yeah, that must be the thing that's putting us in debt. It's not. I don't know if it's a communications problem in the part of the media that we can't explain it well. Talk me down as well. I mean, or don't talk me down. What do we do about this? The Republican Party has half of the Congress, and they are that.
I can't talk you down. I mean, when it comes to foreign aid, for example, most people in this country think that foreign aid is between 25 and 15% of the budget. They'd like to see it reduced to about 10%, not realizing that it's, 1%. I think your point, though, about how people don't understand what government does is really important, because they don't connect the clown show in Washington to any potential harm to themselves. They feel very insulated from it all. And they don't understand that when things start to break down, it will be like what Ernest Hemingway said about going bankrupt. It'll be gradually and then all at once. And so they don't understand what it's like to have highways that are no longer maintained, or checks that are no longer deposited to their accounts, or air traffic control systems that no longer they just don't get any of that, because responsible adults have always stepped in to fix the chaos behind people like this. There's a small percentage of people in elected government, policymakers, experts, administrators, they keep the government functioning every day. And so people don't think there's any real danger to themselves. And the people who are running this carnival, they're insulated from this by money and power and privilege, and they're not worried about what will happen if things go south. And Donald Trump just wants to stay out of jail. He doesn't care about whether or not the mail gets delivered. And so, I think the word that we've all been using here is unseriousness. The problem is, and, I take Professor Ziblatt's point about it's not funny, but it's almost, if you don't laugh, you'll scream. But this unseriousness paves the way to authoritarianism. It really is the road to hell, because people, they're not even committed enough to some idea that is anti-democrat. They're not committed to anything. And so they kind of find themselves along this road without really knowing how or why they got there, while everything falls apart around them. And then they'll blame everyone else for that. And that will just confirm their belief that democracy doesn't work.
Right. And there's sort of frog in a boiling pot piece to it, Daniel Ziblatt, because, I was kind of getting obsessed today. There's a big Washington Post story that talks about the fact that you literally have a longer lifespan if you live in a blue state versus a red state, or a blue county versus a red county, and how red state politics, there's like a frog in a boiling pot, right? So people who live in Ohio used to have a similar life expectancy to people who live in California. No more. California is like the second longest life expectancy. Ohio's is muddling near the bottom. Why? Because the policies that rich people in Ohio put in place that are great for them, deregulation, don't worry about the seatbelt rules. You don't have to have that. We don't have to worry about like water pollution. We just go ahead and keep polluting. That's great for rich people, but people in Ohio are actually dying younger, right? I mean, people who live in nearby counties in Pennsylvania literally live longer because of policy. The bureaucrats people call the deep state are running the state, as Tom just said. And in the cases of places like Mississippi and Ohio and Alabama, the policies that people who make money and don't care about regular people, those policies are killing people. The U.S. is the only modern country that has a 8-year gap between the life expectancy of people with college degrees and people without. That's not true anywhere else but here. And so what you have is people who then are angry about not being able to pay their rent and angry about not being able to make a living or dying young, or their kid died at 30, from a car accident because no seatbelts. Then they also get driven to the authoritarian, to the autocrat. They think the answer is the entertainment spectacle of a Donald Trump, who this week said the following. These are just some of his speeches. He labeled the New York Attorney General a racist and a monster, trying to gin up white rage, mocked Paul Pelosi after he was brutally assaulted by a home intruder, called for police to shoot shoplifters on sight, and said migrants, this is a new one, illegally crossing into the U.S. are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country.